The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's happening, Benton here? Sunday morning. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to the replay crew. Chilling in the Versa. Feeling a bit poorly this morning, uncharacteristically. Um, Although I found generally in the past when using cannabis, I'm typically all on or all off, meaning no cannabis whatsoever, or all the cannabis all of the time, typically. And what I found in the past is if it's some sort of stomach issues or maybe some nausea or just general uh, digestive related things. Uh, that all that cannabis, I may have been feeling this way the entire time, for the most part, if that makes sense. It sort of covers it up. Um, and I've been starting later in the day with the cannabis, and I have one vape cart left that I have not. It's a brand new vape cart, and after that one, we may be done for a while. The royal we, of course, as if anybody's looking at the screen and is able to see my user text. Yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle last yesterday and this morning. As much as I crow and go on and on and on about this true knowledge of self slash self realization, which is as described in the past, functions uh, as a technology via proper identification, inside myself with what I know myself to be. And what I'm running into, and it is, somewhat novel, from my perspective, um, looking at the future within this, again, delusory realm, this realm, counterfeit realm. Uh, I'm the genuine article. What I am, not Benton, right? Again, let's be clear, not Benton. The performance or the performer. What I am is the so-called real thing, which, surprise, surprise, happens to be the strongest brand of at least my life. Coca-Cola, and then this realm being created or existing, at the level of making an enemy, or its goal making an enemy of me. What is being accomplished, um, in this counterfeit realm via the world. Uh, all of the things happening in the world. That's the mechanism that's made an enemy of what I am, right? So that the adversarial elements are present, and part of my Benton as performer is with the playing the fool to some extent with the potential neurodivergence, and a bit naive and gullible to some extent in the moment, although innocent, right? That's, if we look at the meanings of these terms, this is not altogether a bad thing. In some ways, it's like, yeah, you know, uh, the realm is not able to fully, run and I need to get away from these sexual descriptions, but, the realm is not able to bring me to heal, right? HEEL, interesting word, heal. Um, because of my I'm not able to fully acquiesce or conform to this place, thankfully, right? And unbowed to some extent, right? um which does seem to be a characteristic, that the never surrender, fight, fight, fight of the so-called right, which I find just as ridiculous, just as decadent, just as depraved as the lefty communists. And in fact, I ran into some lefty communists yesterday, or maybe some faux FAUX communists. And in fact, they had posted up a couple of fellows. I'm assuming in their 20s. It's hard for me to tell sometimes, but they had set up a little table there and were engaging passersby in conversation. They had some communist paraphernalia, although I did not spot it as such initially. And um, it's a spot I've given some of my speeches, you know, uh, and I was feeling something was going on with me yesterday, and it seems to persist into today. Dare I say, emotionally or energetically. Probably energetically would be the way to phrase it. And whatever's going on in society and in the city of Los Angeles and the state of California, in the United States of America, uh, the idea of a collective consciousness and all of these things. Um, and I am going to bring this back to the strength of the delusion itself, the strength, how strong that delusion is. And that's when I talk about the future of my own practices, and that's via struggle, right? At least in part. Um, and I do tend towards overconfidence in a way, and a bit of a swagger, and big headedness and arrogance, which is fine because I'm well acquainted with dealing with that. Because in my case, it's absolutely true. Pride goeth before the fall, depending on what one considers to be the fall. I'm assuming they don't mean the season, the fall, but um, in some ways, my life, Benton's life, has been like this series of getting big-headed and arrogant and a little too cocksure. Also, another term I probably could choose another term, and then almost immediately getting the instant karma justice of being humbled, which is fairly close to the word for humiliation, right? Or it's a close term to humiliation, which thankfully I'm not into, but I'm able to tolerate. Shout out to the Jehovah's Witnesses. As a function of the way I was raised, I seemingly was desensitized to some extent by, not immune from, but somewhat desensitized to things that I'm probably just less sensitive to, being humbled or even humiliated to some extent. Although then you get into the anger response of humiliation in my case. So I don't know that I've been too far. I probably have never been too far down that path of humiliation because of just my strong anger and all of these things in the past, anyway. And back to feeling kind of poorly. My stomach got tore up yesterday, and I'm doing my best not to blame the restaurant I ate at. I had basically a large burrito, but without the wrap, so it was a bowl, right? But what I would put in a burrito from that place, I suppose. And the food has always been high quality, and I've never had an issue there. So I'm not going to blame the food. I'm going to blame whatever was in my intestines, that the black beans and the avocado and whatever else is working upon, right? The the soluble and insoluble fibers and all of these things, and then a little bit of dairy. I'll do the sour cream, which historically I was never a sour cream guy, and I don't know what they use whatever the Mexican version of sour cream is, and even a little cheese, which I think is maybe goat cheese. I'm not exactly sure. Um, Not that I'm lactose intolerant, but I've never been a big dairy person. So, that can help move things along as well. The old bubble guts, as they say. But part of eating so clean overall is, I'm never like running to the bathroom, and I'm trying not to get graphic here. Um, a lot of folks are turned off by anything that sounds kind of gross or ooh, gross. You know, a lot of folks are turned off by that. So, and bear with me while I gather my energies. I can tell I'm not low energy overall. I'm low energy for me, right? And then that's something I think about talking to these 25-year-olds. I'm presuming maybe a little college age, I guess. Yesterday, talked to these commies, which I don't know that they, who knows? Maybe they're just playing around with, and it's an ideology, right? And from my point of view, and with what I know, especially when we talk about the true knowledge of self, and then by extension, understanding the realm, what the realm is. These are appropriate topics. Ideology, and myself taking quite a long time to finally understand. Oh well, the ideology. Well, those are all dead because they belong to this place. Uh, so we can talk about capitalism and communism and the idea of communist revolution, and that's entertainment, right? So this is where I don't necessarily get myself in trouble, because that wouldn't be the correct terminology, but you know part of my problem, not problem, but part of what I'm talking about here is I can actually have a conversation with the lefties if they've educated themselves to some extent, right? While at the same time I realize, okay, whatever conversation we're having, surely we can all recognize that it will be off to the re-education camp for me, assuming that there were to be a communist revolution. And some would argue that there already has been in America in some ways. That if I wanted to spend the time and energy, I could probably make the case that there was, and I'm pretty sure somebody wrote some books in the 60s about this, the pillars of communism being, more or less fully fomented in America. But see, what I'm talking about when I begin to describe the ins and outs of the realm, when I'm slicing and dicing and I'm analyzing, and yes, that is, there's a part of my mind that is stimulated, whatever my reward centers are. It's not all dopamine. There's, endorphins. My understanding of dopamine is I don't even want to get into it because I'd have to brush up on it. But serotonin, the feel good chemicals of the body. In the short run, uh, my attraction to discussing intellectual topics for entertainment, it certainly has positive, um, accrual, positive rewards accrue to me. However, that seems to be more short lived. And then on the back end, when I'm again meditatively observing my internal space, my so-called sphere of influence, that as I refer to it, then I see the damage that's been wrought, because in order to go through those discussions, and this includes the live stream, yesterday morning's live stream, which was mostly me just free form rambling about just various, what I've observed, again, related to people and their own behavior within the counterfeit realm here, right? And so what that represents is, to me anyway, from my perspective, is it reinforces just how strong the delusory realm can become. And in fact, I would argue or assert that that's what most individuals are seemingly trapped in, and also including me up until about 6 months ago, although probably to a lesser extent. you know um, Maybe falling away from being quite so strongly identified with the realm itself and defining myself in relation to the realm, but then even realizing as much as I come on here and talk about certain, this is where the show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite part comes in, is there are times when I'm not perfectly practicing what I'm preaching, in spite of my efforts. And that's where we get to the struggle is genuine, right? Meaning, because I have access to it within myself, you know, what I am authoritatively is able to, sign off and say, yes, this is actually happening, but still within a delusion, within the context of a delusion. So now, you know, now we get into, what does that even mean, right? So genuine is probably a better term than strictly real, although not necessarily. And then some of what I'm demonstrating so far in this discourse is there's always the potential for a losing of one's way in these practices, right? And again, this channel is entertainment. I'm speaking for entertainment purposes, not to create a movement, not to lead anybody, right? If people hear something that I say and then they choose, how to take that or not take it, how to react to it or not react, it's all up to the individual to make those determinations. But I've known for a long time, and especially again with the recent revelation, the true knowledge of self, I've understood to be looking out the entire time, um, for the reality that with respect to a thought process and the just the what's technically required at a level of what must be done on a day in day out basis to continue one's present lifestyle, right? That there is certainly a potential to sort of get lost in all of that, and at least temporarily, right? And again, back to Krishnamurti, um, one of the things I learned from his seminal work, uh, The First and the Last Freedom, it's not a problem for me to temporarily lose my way in these ways of approach and thinking, as long as I understand that that is what is happening, because now I'm able to transcend, the only way out is through. Now I'm able to move beyond. But I see that, the benefit to me of discussing for such a length of time, like to spending almost all of yesterday's stream slicing and dicing the realm and the various, characteristics, and then getting into some of the psychology, and then carrying that over later in the day into having an overall enjoyable and, meaningful to some extent conversation uh, with the young commies, right? And it's just reinforcing, unfortunately, the potential, right? Not that there is a potential, but reinforcing I should say, like the myth of the validity of, this realm and what's happening in the realm and the nature of what's happening in the realm. So I think that's the ultimate issue with, my interactions with the young fellows yesterday was, or, grown adults. I guess in today's climate, especially with certain things in the news, it's probably important to make that distinction. Although even that's probably a violation, right? Even that's probably a curse, probably a cursing blessing in some way. Treating it as if I might, look, you at this point you either understand what I'm referring to or you don't. So I'll drop that, and then all of these immigration raids is and I'm not necessarily well received uh, across the board as a white guy in of a certain age in Los Angeles who comes across a certain type of way. You know, um, if I was one of these devil worshippers walking around, like I'm pretty sure they're not getting nearly the dirty looks that I get, right? Because if you look at the fashion and the way people present themselves, I mean, uh, a decent portion of these white people walking around, and again, it's only the guys who are really going to get the hatred. It's not the women, which is good because I don't know that there's too many female ICE agents out there. although I'm sure there's some. And then this is not a strictly white guy, also not a strictly white guy undertaking, right? It's not 100% white dudes uh, conducting these raids, but definitely more animosity and dirty looks directed my way in general. And as a very aggressive person, by nature, and then all of that being enhanced, uh, with my upbringing, it brings out, it makes it not difficult, but it makes it more likely that I will choose to, you know, uh, sort of lean into that aggression, and then could be in the case of a loud public speech, right? And then with so much tension, boiling through below the surface and then boiling over at times, um, is that helpful? Is that harmful? At times, I can see people listening intently, and they're actually, even people who are just at a stoplight with their window down, and my comical performance and my gesticulations. And again, people will watch anything, so that does gather or garner some attention. But then, people are so dissatisfied, and again, why are they dissatisfied? Because of uh, defining themselves in relation to let's just call it what it is. It's a realm of death. This is what this is. Not a realm of life, folks. The nature of this place is not the nature of what is alive. It's the nature of what is dead, right? Um, that's just what it is. So again, what I am, the force that I'm one with, love, creation, my essence, my soul, my nature, right? That's everything alive. You know, this place, in spite of how it presents itself, the nature of this place is the nature of death. But then they're like, well, what about the birds are singing, and the sun is shining and the trees and all of this? Okay, sure. Absolutely. However, is any of that life, going to, does it exist beyond this place? Can it exist beyond this place? Because what I am, again, this is where the self-realization and the true knowledge of self comes in. What I am is um, in fact, it exists again beyond time and space, right? Uh, and as far as I can tell, only within delusion, am I even, or is that force even able to, maybe via its own imagination, right? Maybe only via its own imagination able to experience delusory notions of a location, right? A terra firma, a physical realm. Um, yeah. So yeah, nature's fine. I enjoy nature as well. I'm not sure that it's the purpose of anything, right? It seems to be more of a mechanism, or almost like a substrate, or it facilitates the way that the realm seemingly operates, right? Again, counterfeit, right? Okay, well, counterfeit nature. Okay, great. Yeah, I enjoy counterfeit money, right? The money's counterfeit in a counterfeit realm. Well, I like money, right? Well, the nature the nature is counterfeit in a counterfeit realm. Well, yeah, I enjoy nature. What's really the difference there? Um, Shout out to the chat. Good to see you, Joe Moore. I figured you would be the first comment there, sir. I almost called your shot, but I figured I better not. What's up, Rick and Voy down there? I'm going to go back to not reading the comments, if that's all right. And I've even very uncharacteristically been having some headaches, and they seem like of the tension variety, right? Because historically, I've only ever had headaches that I could tell was like, okay, this is just tension, right? And it's like, yeah, hey Benton, what about this true knowledge of self? And you're talking about you experience way less fear, negative states, tension. Anxiety, yeah, much less. I didn't say zero, right? I have not been entirely delivered from the possibility of ever again experiencing these things, or at least seemingly, right? Seemingly experiencing these things. And then also observing that I seem to be experiencing more of these things. It seems to, based on how I've been, based on yesterday, perhaps, allowing the delusion, uh, allowing that to creep in to my own consciousness a little too strongly. Again, the strength of the delusion itself, I don't believe can be underestimated, or doesn't seem to be underestimatable. And I could be wrong. A lot of this is thought experiments and the way things seem to me. Um, and it's the thinking, right? So it's when I say what I would wish for people is that they would think for themselves, and that's part of the discussion with the communists yesterday. And I credited them for thinking for themselves. But then after I left, I realized, and I'm not advising them. This was not, I do my best to never. Just the idea of giving advice, I find ridiculous in general, just generally. But I could have been a little more clear, but I didn't even understand until I was thinking about it, right? A few minutes later after I had left, that part of that is to never stop thinking for oneself. So the daily practice, right, of, and more specifically, critically thinking, what might be referred to as outside of the box thinking, critical thinking, logic, reason, all of these things. To continue to do that. So, the fact that they're involving themselves, and I'm just taking them at face value. I mean, who even knows? For all I know, there's somebody on the other side of the road, recording all of this for social media. I mean, who the hell? Anything's possible at that level. I mean, who even knows? Maybe you just never know what it is. But taking it as presented, which is again back to the some measure of naivete or gullibility, arguably. Uh, but not across the board, certainly. I am quite savvy in many respects, quite clued in many respects. Uh, so as I trust, again, now we're back to the practice. Now we're back to the internal space. Now we're back to my nature, what I am, right? Not bent in the performance, again, not bent in the performer, not bent in the persona, not bent in the collection of experiences. What I am trusts, right? Lovingly trusts that if these fellas, hopefully they got to this point by at least thinking for themselves. And the one guy said nothing, and the other fella, so he's probably not the guy who said nothing. Maybe he doesn't think for himself, and maybe he's following the guy who does think for himself. Is more of a leader, perhaps. His name was, what was his name? Jed, the guy I was talking to. Probably a made up name. Who knows? Did not seem like a Jedediah, if that's what that would be short for. But just from talking to him, I could tell, okay, he's read some things. He has some knowledge, um, and not just of communism or Marxism. And so, if he continues to think for himself, then presumably at some point he would realize that ideology, the concept of ideology, could be a mistake, right? And but that would depend on, well, what is the goal? So, as far as I can tell, it's spiritual progress, but then part of that is the delusory realm has seemingly, is responsible in some ways for, you know, the spiritual practice actually being, I'm attempting at some point, I realize I'm attempting to get back to where I started, which is the spiritually perfected innocent child who knows nothing of this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions when it exits its mother, right? When it exits its mother's matrix into this, which some people refer to as a matrix, right, or womb, you know. So then is that even progress, right? So now we get into inverse notions of progress, right? But then recognizing that what is viewed as progress is typically only looked at through the yang, or the, again, aggression, assertion, dominance, right? And which is ultimately where, you know, me too strongly identifying with those aspects is probably what has led to a slight increase in the, you know, fear, right? Fear, these negative states of being, anxiety, stress, tension, but then also coupled with the healing, right? The chronic health issues, changing my lifestyle, being healed by Jesus on an ongoing basis, right? And then looking back at how ill I was, especially those first couple of years with the chronic illnesses, and that was the healing, right? The initially the if one is actually doing, if one is giving the condition, if one is ensuring that the body has the conditions necessary to heal, right? Then the healing and the illness, it's experienced at this as the same thing, right? It's like, yeah, the symptoms, right? Well, that's the body healing. You know, the nausea, you know, just the discomfort in the intestines, right? All of these things, you know, that actually is the healing. So, you know, the headache, the tension headache, well, that's probably some tension that's been locked deep down in what seems to be, again, seemingly locked in my tissues. Well, every single day, uh, up to 3 times a day, I'm hanging on a pull-up bar in specific ways to, you know, work with those tissues to, you know, help that all heal. So my knowing and my experience has been that in order for those, you know, whatever those negative or stagnated, you know, low level, low vibrational frequency energies are, that have been trapped, you know, in the energy sphere, well, they are experienced, right, as they're released. So that's most likely responsible for the tension. But then, you know, some of my own diet plays into some of this also, with the kidneys apparently being attached to the, you know, fear and kidneys being related. And then I can see that I had drastically increased my sugar intake because I've gone back to the chocolate, because I haven't been I was on the dark chocolate, the 100% dark chocolate with no sugar for a while, but then I've gone. So what happens is, you know, it becomes too much of a good thing, right? Initially, my kidneys are able to handle the sugar no problem, right? But then eventually, I reach a point where I've taken in too much sugar too many days in a row, and then, and which is part of what the meal I had yesterday is going to help to resolve, sort of put everything where it should be, you know, after I've undone it to some extent, because, you know, I feel a little bit of gout going on, like in my toes, but it's not really painful. It's just my body's letting me know, like, hey man, you know, this is what's happening. How about you take care of this for us? And then, you know, likening that to the state of health of the average person in middle America. And I can't say the average American, because I'm in an area where most people that I see are, you know, what would pass for being fit in the middle part of the country, right? Even if they might be slightly overweight or whatever. You know, even some of these, a lot of these, you know, kind of chubby Hispanic folks or Latin folks, you know, they're staying fit at the level of jogging around and, you know, getting their exercise. I see them jogging around, or I see them at the exercise area, you know, in the park exercising. Um, yeah, tangent. Went off on a tangent there. Get this show back on the road, partner. So that's what I'm working with, in case anybody was curious about an update. I think we're probably close to about 4 hours left on the StreamYard. Who knows? I mean, again, I don't know what I'm going to do when that runs out. I'll presumably have the money to pay for a month of StreamYard. So I don't know. Maybe I will. Uh, And at this point, I'm close enough to out of money that it's really not going to make a difference. It's not a regret, but looking back on it, I certainly, I could have chosen to just pay for a whole year of it when I had plenty of money, right? But that's neither here nor there. And part of that was just my own. It wasn't the money itself; it was that StreamYard, was affordable in my view initially, and they've. But again, people are like, "Hey, inflation, whatever," but it just doesn't seem to be. It's not worth it to me. It just doesn't represent a value to me to pay, especially for a whole year. Although I guess if I end up paying for 12 straight months of it, I guess that is better to pay for the year. But and shout out to Razvan. I think he paid for. Didn't he pay for a whole year at some point? Did I? And this is where just I can't remember. It seems like I think he might have paid for a whole year of the StreamYard, if I recall. Am I remembering that wrong? I haven't seen Razvan around here too much. If anybody knows who I'm talking about, a fan of the channel, long-standing fan of the channel. Although uh, he grew up in Romania, and some of my more religious or what I've been talking about recently may not jibe with what he's got going on at the level of Christianity and all of that. Which is fine, and again, that's the evolution of the thinking, the evolution of the being, right? Um, and again, just the notion of spiritual progress, is that even a thing, right? Or am I looking at it backwards? Am I looking at it as, in fact, getting back to um, where I started in the first place, and then how much of that actually is occurring not through oh, I got to go out here and get me my spiritual progress, right? Again, now we're back to the aggression, the assertion, and the dominance of the yang form, which is not altogether a bad thing, right? It's situational. It's not, but that's something that's it's applied almost across the board by both sexes at this point. You know, a big part of American culture, is this idea of go out and accomplish and be productive, and any goal that could possibly be achieved can only be achieved, you know, through the aggressive, assertive, dominant means of the yang, the masculine energy. And what I would say is, well, yeah, that's true, but based on what the delusory realm itself values, right? Based on what it values. Well, what I am is the value. So that's where the return is. That's the surrender. That's the passive acceptance. That's you know, the there is no struggle there, right? When properly identified within myself with what I know myself to be, there is no struggle. There can't be a struggle. You know, there can't be resistance. What I am doesn't create resistance when properly identified. Benton, the performer, when improperly identified in the moment with the again, with the false notion that this realm is valid, or that there's potential meaning outside of myself within this delusion, right? That's where things get hairy, right? And I like a challenge. I'm very competitive. Um, and you know, it's not even a self-control. It's more of a seeing what's coming on the horizon, and knowing, the characteristics, and knowing, what stimulus, how is Benton the performer likely to react to a particular stimulus, right? And then the outcome of the reaction to that stimulus, is that beneficial in the short run but detrimental in the long run, right? And then the managing of all of that, but then which brings us back to concepts around Fight Club and the idea of to let that which does not matter truly slide. So how is Benton creating these problems, or these challenges, or these issues, or these opportunities for himself? It's through desire, and attachment to outcome, or wanting, having a desire to be accepted on a specific basis, in a given scenario by other human beings, well, by what are purportedly other human beings, although again, I'm not ever able to validate that fully. We're back to the philosophy of solipsism. There's, how can I ever fully validate that, if to describe, okay, what I am is not a human being, so what I am is not a human being, therefore when properly identified, I'm not the same as those people, right? Or these other folks. It functionally in the moment, only when improperly identified, right? Assuming that they are also, and that's even giving them the Nancy Pelosi MS-13 spark of divinity, benefit of the doubt, right? These other beings. And doing all of this with, while maintaining one's sanity, lest we forget. And then weaning myself off of the eggs, right? Well, what is the eggs represent, Mr. Benton? Well, that's healthy fats from my brain. So part of the undiagnosed fake autism and the potential neurodivergence is I've eaten a high fat diet pretty much most, I'd say virtually all of my life. And at a certain point, when I got into, nutrition and fitness and all of this, I could tell at a certain point that I just need more brain fuel than the average person for whatever reason. So I'm actually consuming less fat, and I can, as I'm talking with you fine folks, I can actually see the effects of that, which is not necessarily a bad thing altogether, right? Am I, is Benton's, my, see, I don't even know how to phrase. I know what I'm trying to say in my head. Like I'm directly grasping the concept, and the language is failing me to even describe that. And this is back to what I talk about when, maybe 10% of my understanding, I'm actually able to get into these broadcasts and discourses. And then, whatever the ability of the listener is to take in the 10%, right? So then by the time we get to that, it's maybe 1% is conveyed, which is completely fine. Um, that's neither here nor there, but, I'm certainly aware of all of those dynamics as the conversation moves forward. But, and then, please, let's not loop into problem solving. And, I managed to uh, have plenty of healthy fats the last time I was sleeping in this car for months on end. It's just at this point, I actually like the walking around and picking up the cans and the bottles and, you know, um, all of that. So the way I was, and then the donations were quite generous as well. Um, Not just, on an ongoing basis. It was, sporadically, but very generous donations last year, or whenever that was. I guess I got here summertime last year in Los Angeles. And yeah, I like picking up the cans and the bottles, but it's it's filthy, it's really not convenient unless I devote like half of my hatchback area to storing some cans and bottles overnight. And then we get into bugs, pests, right? Um, Potentially, infesting my vehicle as a result of bringing garbage, literal garbage into the vehicle. So I think I want to avoid all of that. And I've been attracted for a long time to this notion of more or less just wandering about, but not the wilderness, right? Urban areas, more or less on foot with, you know, a minority of physical items. And I lived this way, as many people know, for an extended many years, but it was again large hiking backpack, right? Uh, that started out quite heavy, and even by the end, when I was quite good at you know the bare necessities with the weight of the backpack was still 35 pounds, right? And that doesn't include food or water. That's just, this is like, oh, these are the items that I, am willing to carry around everywhere I go, and 10 miles a day on foot on average. Although I haven't been walking that much lately. That's probably another thing. I'm going to have to ramp up the walking. Um, for whatever reason, I'm taking a break from, which I love to walk. It's kind of strange, but, and I'm getting enough exercise because it's, everywhere I go is on foot. But, yeah, so the idea of, but then, again, the things you own that we own end up owning us. Just this car, it's too, it has tags on it. It's for 10 more months or whatever. It's, it operates, when they force me to move and park somewhere else, I'm able to do that, you know, just, it's not justified. It's not worth any money. I could get a couple hundred, maybe, who knows what I could get for it, but, one of those people that just come up and they just tow it away, right? For more or less for the scrap value. And who knows, $250. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. Um, that's not really worth it. And I'm going to run out. I'll run out of money either way. But I can't see it. That's the thing is, I'm having trouble giving a fuck, except for times in which I allow myself to too strongly identify with the potential realness or life of the realm itself. Because this place is not alive, folks. That's an illusion. This place contains. This place is not alive, right? This is a dead place. Um, period. That's what this place is. Um, so I'm realizing that when whatever I've gone through in the last day and a half, and recognizing some of the negative states kind of creeping back in to some extent, but not bad, just noticeably, right? I'm still overall doing just fine. And recognizing that, oh, well, that's actually, the more motivated I feel, the more motivated I'm thinking about, like, well, I could do this for money, I could do that for money, and what would Jesus do? And then at a certain point, it's like, well, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have a smartphone. I mean, I'm just guessing. So then it's like, hey, I don't know that I can just use this as a free pass for you know attempting to exist in a delusory realm. I just what would Jesus doing it, when people expect me to get a job and pay taxes and all of this. And I'm happy to work. Um, at this point, I would like to avoid the paying into the federal system as much as possible, because I really don't agree with the government and what it does. But I already did not agree with the government and what it was doing. And being in an area where so much of the populace at least claims to be against what the federal government is doing to migrants, then I'm the type of person who will call them out, call them to the carpet, hold their feet to the fire, and say, "Yeah, well, you're paying for it, folks." Like it's difficult to plausibly or creditably claim to oppose a thing that one is, in fact, spending the how much time are most of these folks spending on a regular basis going to employment or their small business and paying taxes into the federal system, and then to listen to somebody like Adam Carolla, who grew up in Los Angeles, talking about, you know, what he would want to see happen, with the leadership of the city, and the changes he would want to see made would lead to less street vending, right? People that are able to set up on the street and earn a living, you know, uh, selling food or other, consumables. And then my thing is like, well, I wonder what proportion of these people don't pay taxes, right? And in fact, I've even heard that in a rap song, Sick Jackin, who's from this area, who's from this general area, um, about selling on the corner is to avoid paying tax. And I don't think he meant drugs. I think he meant although maybe he did, but that could also mean like street vending. And I'm sure some of them do pay taxes. Um, but at this point, again, from a what would Jesus do standpoint, um, the less people pay into this thing, the better, right? But then, and see, now I'm back to, I haven't begun to identify. See, now I caught myself where I could see that if I continued down the path I was about to go, that I would fall away from proper identification within myself. And I feel it. I feel it. And so that's most likely what I'm going through now is I'm being not punished. See, I don't think to view it as punishment would be proper, but what I am is unable to do anything other than, if I'm willing to pay attention, let me know that, hey man, this ain't the right way to be going here, sir. How about you? How about you get right, as my people would say? Yes, indeed. Give me a moment. I'll be right back. Quick break. Very quick break. All right, we're back. And to bring it back to a biblical or a worship spiritual context, I mean, what I'm describing here, this is the Comforter, right? The Holy Ghost. Um, the Bible. Again, not pushing the Bible. This is not a Bible channel. Alan Watts himself said, if a fellow from Arkansas, you know, had true knowledge of self, he said it in a little different way, but this is what he meant. He said that he would more or less run around saying that he was Jesus because he's not going to have any other frame of reference, right? Now I'm not saying that. That's not my contention, right? I'm not asserting that. What I'm talking about is John, I think it's 14. I'm not a Bible expert, but I believe 14:26. I used to have almost a photographic memory, but I think that's it. John 14:26, talking about the Comforter, in quoting Jesus. I will send the Comforter, and which is the Holy Ghost, and you know it will teach you all things. Right. So that's part of what I'm talking about here. This is the Comforter, the Holy Ghost, teaching me how to avoid temporarily identifying with the strong delusion of this realm, uh, you know, to level up my ability to not get swept away, right? And that's back to my concept earlier of spiritual practice, because remember, the spiritually perfected, right, infant can't be swept away by this delusion, right? By improper, it only knows its own nature, right? That's why it's spiritually perfected, much like, or more correctly, that's how that's observable. And again, much like Jack from the story Jack and the Beanstalk, which haven't talked about much lately, but I've talked about quite a bit in the recent past. That Jack from that story, the townspeople and his family, after they've entrusted him with the wealth of the family, and then sent him off into the world, right? Air quotes, the world, in this analogy. And because he is fully living what he is, right? He's fully identified. He's correctly identified within himself, and so strongly, seemingly, he's unable. He's not able. See that he's perfectly right. He's perfected spiritually. He can't identify with the validity of this place at the level of, oh well, people are going to try to steal your wealth, right? Now, Why is that? Well, it's because Jack would, in that state, would know that, well, he's the, what he is the value, not the coins, right? Not the coins. That in fact is not the value, because it's dead, because its nature is death, because it's of this world, right? So be in the world, not of the world, be alive, not dead, right? To actually live and express one's nature, assuming that nature is the same as the nature that I'm one with, you know, love and creation, and to perfectly express that, you know, in a realm that is the expresses as the antithesis, in some way, what, the yin to the yang, right? Or the yang to the yin. Yeah, fascinating. Very interesting. Very interesting. And this is what, in part, thinking for myself has led me to. It's created this and other practices and undertakings, um, since my early to mid 30s, has led Benton the performer to where, as much as Benton the performer has, sophisticated skills and is able to, temporarily, seemingly fit into a situation, in this realm of death, this delusion, um, I'm not able to pull it off, right? Um, which is not a bad thing, but it's, I've evolved seemingly, right? And we can debate whether or not it could actually be a devolution, but either way, it doesn't. It's neither here nor there. The Benton speaking and performing right now is no longer going to be able to. In fact, even when earlier versions tried really fucking hard, they still weren't able to conform and fully fit into society, right? And what I've noticed in my 50 years is that I've become more aware of my surroundings and what goes on around me, and people's psychology and how people behave. And the more I've become more sophisticated, it seems like the general populace has also become more sophisticated. So I have to think that, and then I was with younger people, when I was 25, the fact that I could mostly conform, but not fully. Well, did the other folks even notice, right? That, well, yeah, he seems like he's, fully normied out, but there's something odd, there's something strange there, right? And probably some people noticed it here and there, but has that actually? I would say it has, and I would credit slash blame the rise of the smartphone for much of that. Now, back when I studied all that pickup artist type shit, starting in, I don't know, long time ago, you know, 2007, 2006, 2005. And I know my pop by 2011, I knew enough to do a popular podcast at the time. And so, yeah, I probably had several years of studying that material. Um, Now, of course, it took me so long to set it up, I've forgotten why I even mentioned it. That never happens. Ha ha ha. Why did I bring that up? The pickup artist stuff. Oh, so now, having, and it's ridiculous, but having mastered that back in the day, at least at the theoretical, levels, because I never needed that stuff to, be somewhat successful, I should say successful. Um, However, there are skills involved and understanding and situational awareness. And, a lot of my personal growth came via that means. And then looking back on it, I consider it ridiculous notions. And then it's almost like a learning of the rules to then be able to break all of the rules, right? It's like, because, and so the reason I mention all of this is even just normie channels now. Um, some of the content creators will just matter of factly start talking about some of these pickup artist concepts as if it's more or less common knowledge. And I'm listening to it. I'm like, yeah, I was, you know, discussing and talking about that in 2010, 2011, even earlier. So it is a bit bizarre to be ahead of the curve in certain ways. It's definitely surreal, right? When I hear this, because it's just like, wow, really? And then it's sort of also reminding me of my own, how bozo-ish earlier versions of Benton were in various ways. Quite bozo-ish. Whoa, Nelly Bozo. Yep. And back to the Christianity, and I don't consider myself a Christian. I don't want to be confused for those people, but if there's nothing happening within the individual, within their energy sphere, their sphere of influence, if there's nothing happening at the level of casting out demons, receiving healing, and being taught by the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, what's the point? Like, I honestly, I see no point to. Now I understand why it exists, and I understand the nature of the religion. Surprise, surprise, it's death because it's of this realm. The Christian religion is of this world, folks. Be in the world, not of the world. And the Christian religion is of this world, and its nature is the nature of this dead world. So, how does one reconcile that within one's mind by a Benton who's, and then Benton is not giving advice, he's speaking for entertainment purposes, his own and perhaps the listeners, if that's in the cards. But then, um, dang it, lost my train of thought. Um, Now, I will say that I've been saying since day one that the audience is smarter than I am. Collectively, the audience is smarter than I am. So you'll probably know what I mean. Anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, the purpose of the religion. So again, back to the ideas of external meaning versus internal meaning. As far as I can tell, the entire potential for meaning via concepts around Christ, Jesus, an idea of a Holy Ghost, right? All of these things, uh, spiritual warfare, all of that. Yeah, that's all inside of me, right? Because remember, God is love, and the kingdom of love is within me, or the kingdom of God is within me. And again, when properly identified within myself, there can't be a struggle. What I am doesn't create a struggle. It's when antithesis has has done whatever it's done to then cajole or compel or coerce or trick individuals who are endowed with creative force, to serve antithesis and destruction, and to so strongly identify with, and to, in fact, again, their very identities created and being operated uh, in relation to how the realm defines itself and propagates itself and puts itself forward in through money and power and business, right? So that the individual has great difficulty, I suspect, right? I wasn't this way necessarily, although I'm sure I am, and I have been in certain ways and may very well be in others. But it seems very difficult, if not impossible, for the majority of individuals to, in fact, interface with themselves at all outside of a business or, an idea of making money, job as identity, and then the person fitting themselves into a society completely based on that's very nearly based entirely upon business transactions and monetary policy and all of these things. Again, all things that are dead and will never know life, right? Um, and that's where the counterfeit notion comes in of the realm, because when I talk about these negative states of being, the fear, the stress, the anxiety, all of these things that people experience, you know, it seems very real. And again, what I am is unable to conceptualize or even experience any of those negative states. So, by extension, I can't even be sure what, I understand there's a word for anxiety, and I understand what I experience, and then that term gets attached to it. But I have no idea if that's so. To me, that's counterfeit, because I can't even tell, is that a real thing, or am I imagining it based on my own, um, finding myself influenced by death, really influenced by the possibility of death, the influence of the possibility of death when what I am cannot ever know death. And somebody write that down. I don't know, email it to me, please. Uh, just that last statement. Because if I stop and try to write it down, I've already forgotten whatever it was, but maybe I'll go back and let's get a timestamp. Somewhere around 1 hour and 7 minutes in, that was an epiphany, whatever it was I just said. And I taught myself long ago not to attempt to grasp onto these things, although I will write them down if it's, a proper time and a place and I'm not doing a thing. Um, but yeah, it's pretty. It's not heavy, but that's liberating, right? And then what are and well, I mean, strictly speaking, Christianity is Eastern, but what the Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of this, um, this idea of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and all this, a lot of those concepts revolve around, and especially Buddhism, the liberation. I guess Hinduism as well. I need to go back and study up. I've forgotten some of what I've read here, but the idea of liberating oneself from the cycle of death and rebirth, right? Well, I mean, from my perspective, what better way to do that than, to continue to affirm the validity of what I am and the authority of what I am versus the invalidity, right? An invalid is someone who could very well be on their deathbed. But yeah, the invalidity, which I don't know if that's a word, but um, of the realm itself. And then, it's not an altogether bad thing, but again, the comforter teaching me in these moments that, my error in even considering the possibility of the validity of death. Death is invalid that's what it is. Death is in invalidity, right? It's the lack of validity in a way, right? Null and void, you know. He gone, right? He was here. Where'd he go? I don't know, man. He was just here. Now he's gone. Was I ever even here? Well, apparently, within a realm of within a delusory realm of death and destruction, and anything of this, anything who's in which everything that originates within this delusion, anything whose origin can be traced back to this delusion, it's dead, right? So then the idea of just wandering around with little to no possessions in a realm that will never know life, and while secure, which is probably not the right term, but knowing 100%, even if some of it is forgetting what I know and then reminding myself of what I know, which is ultimately what happened yesterday, temporarily forgetting what I knew, right? And then remembering it now. And that's also in that the word remembrance is same in those same verses, John chapter 14. So it's pertaining, but you know, again, what I am, I almost said, what's there to worry about? But see, that's almost a logical, that's borderline a curse, because that's almost like a logical rationalization or justification for what I'm describing here, which it doesn't. Again, uh, truth cannot be validated by ignorance, right? It's fascinating, fascinating. I'm definitely feeling more of the healing, letting me know. Maybe that's the comforter letting me know that I'm on the right track here. And whatever stomach distress I was undergoing seemed to, unlike yesterday when some of it seemed to be brought on by me talking on live stream. Today, it seems to be the opposite. The old digestion seems to be moving in the direction of normalcy. So, to whomever or whatever may be responsible for that, I thank you. Benton, the performer, thanks them. And I'm reminding myself in the moment, none of what I'm talking about here can ever, the moment somebody tries to externalize, to bring what I'm speaking on into the external and to attempt to monetize it in any way, just that just that effort changes it from manifested truth into something that can never represent manifested truth, can never represent the real thing, and is of the exact same nature of the rest of the products and services that are available for profit, right? For profit. And then ideas of what profit, what profits a man to profit in this realm of death and destruction. In a counterfeit realm, how could I ever benefit um, from seeking what this realm has to offer, when the process of seeking what this realm has to offer, uh, that's a process whereby it's virtually a guarantee that I will almost always, in order to achieve that, and I don't even want to say the being would need to, out of necessity, incorrectly identify with the authority and validity that this realm would like us to believe is inherent in this place, right? And logically, I would say, well, the fact that I'm seemingly here and things are seemingly happening, that doesn't authorize or validate the activities themselves, right? That's quite the mind fuck. How much, and I know I've mentioned this recently. I hear myself repeating myself, but how much mileage does this realm get out of you know implying that there has to be authority and validity inherent in society or inherent within this realm of this delusory realm of death and destruction, there has to be validity. Uh, there has to be the potential bona fides, simply because things seem to be happening. It's like, yeah, the things that are seemingly happening, almost all of them were seemingly happening when I came online, meaning when I, began forming memories that I still carry to this day, right? 1980 or so until now, and understanding it with the true knowledge of self. Well, that's even a delusion. The idea of a 1980, a progression of time from 1980 to 2025. Yeah, that seems to be happening. I know that strictly speaking, that is not what's happening, and I have no interest whatsoever. And I lack the IQ to then go onto a panel somewhere and debate slash discuss. Well, what is time then? It's this shape, it's that shape. Who cares? It's dead. Time's dead. Who cares? Why would I sit around? What I am is not interested in discussing the characteristics and nature of a dead thing, which brings us to the errors of yesterday, which was yesterday I spent a great deal of time doing the thing that I just said, how ridiculous. Again, show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. That includes me. I just did the thing very recently that I'm now saying, why would a person do that? Because that's what this is. It's the opportunity or potential to maybe uh, fall into all sorts of calamities and catastrophes, right? Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk, unable to conceptualize, his own nature can't relate to potential calamity, because in order for him to be able to relate to potential calamity, that would he would have to treat blessing as if it were a curse. And outside of being offered up to Moloch, right, which has popped back up in the news. I've seen Bohemian Grove news stories in the feed. Well, that's Moloch, folks. The altar that they, what happens, what supposedly happens at Bohemian Grove. Again, I'm going official. That's now official fiction layer. I'm not going. This is not conspiracy layer anymore. So don't tell me that. Oh, well, that's all been this. It's actually this, and it's really the. I don't. I'm not going down a Bohemian Grove rabbit hole. I'm talking about Bohemian Grove, the official fiction version. Right. That's back in the news. So yeah, me bringing up Moloch is mentioning Moloch for the last however many months. Right. That's pertaining apparently. But yeah, outside of so Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk retaining uh retaining his spiritually perfected state, right? Now then we could get into discussions about, well, how, if it is spiritually perfected, how could it ever be anything other than that? Like how, but yeah, again, I lack the horsepower, thankfully. And who cares? Again, Benton is wired for effectiveness. Benton, at the core of his being, is obsessed with real world effectiveness, right? So my mind is always going to bring it back to what is effective, and a lot of what's effective is the moment a phenomenon, the moment any particular idea or undertaking or spiritual practice, the moment I recognize, well, this particular, what could look like a tool or an implement, the moment I recognize, well, that strategy will never bear fruit at the level of real world effectiveness, I abandon it, and I don't consider how I feel about pursuing that path. I don't concern myself. Well, that's not even true. Um, Only speaking from a strategic and a logical standpoint, avoiding the emotional side of things, but strategically speaking, that's, once it's null and void, it's thrown out and it's not revisited, unless circumstances and context changes such that it would be revisited, right? And this is in some ways, what I'm able to do that a lot of other folks just simply are unable to do is operate at levels of real world effectiveness. Which is not to brag or toot my own horn, because I believe me, there's within this delusion and within performing as a human persona and all of these things, the limitations inherent within them, all of that. I certainly have downsides to the upside, right? The idea of double-edged sword, or greatest strength, you know, is greatest weakness type shit. So yeah, there's that. Effectiveness. So that's, and it shows in my approach to the Bible. It shows to my approach in, Jesus, Holy Ghost, all these other concepts. What I'm able to effectively work with within myself, that's what sticks. Everything else is thrown out. So, virtually all the parts of the New Testament that are credited to Paul, we throw all of that out, but I'll still refer to it if I want to, right? I'll still reference some of his writings if I choose to, right? What I mean is, it's to not bring his ideas into my internal space to act upon, because we've already got the gospel of Jesus. Why are we worried about the gospel of Paul? See? And in fact, I would have put forward that Christianity, which maybe in America, well, just could be referred to as churchianity in a way. And I did not come up with that concept. That was Paramahansa Yogananda. Never know if I'm saying that right. I'm pretty sure I am. Or at least, close enough. And did I lose my train of thought because I brought up Yogananda? Wait a minute. I recaptured the thread last time this happened. Also, I'm having way more ringing in my ears lately, and that may have something to do with I'm sort of powering down the nutrition. I'm not just, it's not all nutrition all day long anymore. I'm beginning to wean myself off of some of this nutrition, but the ringing in the ears also seems to coincide with the increased spiritual attacks. And when we look at the spiritual attacks of the pandemic period, I was acutely aware during the pandemic that the level of sustained spiritual attack, right, broad-based sustained spiritual attack was very, very high, and I had a lot of ringing in the ears back then, and now I have so little that it's quite noticeable. And I noticed yesterday I was having some of it, and today as well. So that's interesting. But apologies for losing my train of thought there. It does happen. Um, why in the heck did I? If I could remember what I said right before I started talking about Paramahansa Yogananda, it was a word that I got from him. What was the word I got from him? Churchianity. Yes. Okay, maybe we'll get back on track here. Churchianity. It's that the people who, you know, would in a vacuum probably want to follow the teachings of Jesus in the Bible, they're too easily convinced, or simply don't understand that they're free to read the Bible without ingesting the entire book, right? They don't have to accept the Bible in its entirety. They can choose parts of it. And in fact, what's presented as the Bible in its entirety is in fact a curated version of the Bible. Lest we forget, there is other books that are, not considered canonical, right? Canon, Canon, right? The canonical books of the Bible. And then we get into the canonical gospels and synoptic gospels, and pretty soon now we're in Pharisee fucking religiosity, bureaucracy land. Folks, Jesus never created a bureaucracy. Every time they tried to get him to create a bureaucracy, he said things like, well, love your neighbor as yourself, and love the Lord thy God with all of your heart, or all of your being, or whatever. And he said, that shall be the whole of the law, right? Supposedly. I mean, again, within a delusion, right? Well, but could a being who's manifesting truth and speaks some words, right? And if those words get written down, I don't know. Of course, it was a different language, and then it's been translated, but yeah, I'm willing to accept that the core of the message uh, is certainly, again, time itself as a delusion, right? Why can't why wouldn't I be able to accept that the teachings of Jesus, um, that exist in the English language version of the King James Holy Bible, why couldn't that be, you know closer to the teachings than not, right? And that would actually, in some ways, validate the system, in my view, Moloch's machine needing to then, after the gospel of Jesus, oh well, here's a whole bunch of words written by Saul of Tarsus, right? But presumably authorized by Jesus. Well, I see no proof of that, right? Because it's 100% possible for me to follow the teachings of Jesus without, again, swallowing the entire Holy Bible. Because remember, most of the people that go to church, this is a true fact, most of the people that go to church, when they hear word of God, they think that means written Bible in its entirety. No, it does not. Absolutely not. That is, word of God does not mean written Bible. Again, written Bible is of this place, it's dead. The Bible itself has its origins in this place, folks. It's dead. The nature of the Bible is the same of this nature. What I am is the way. What I am is the truth. What I am is the life, not the written Bible. See? And people who probably would like to um, resurrect Christ within themselves, right? The Christ rising within the individual, right? Within their sphere of influence, the power of Jesus, you know. What does the Lord is my shepherd mean? You know, shepherd of what? Shepherd of my Nissan Versa? Shepherd of my commercial driver's license? A shepherd of my ability to earn a living in a realm of death and destruction, that a counterfeit realm of death and destruction that exists via delusion, right? Because remember that it's all got, if it's not within me, right? If it's not within my sphere of influence, I have no power over it. So they say with Christ I can do all things. It doesn't say where. Where? Well, not outside of me. I don't have any power outside of me. So if Paul wrote, with Christ I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me, well, what was his goal? What was Saul of Tarsus's goal? What was he working towards? And again, I'm going official fiction, whether or not that was a real person. See, what were his motivations? So it's the point of all of this spiritually can only ever be, what am I able to manifest within myself, right? But Christianity as operated will say blasphemy. How dare you, lowly, wretched creature? How dare you aspire to such heights within yourself? See, the religion itself that claims to be, that claims to still represent, right, the authority of Jesus. The church itself still claims that authority. right? Whereas my opinion, this is my opinion only, I don't think Jesus Christ gave a flying fuck about churches. Just my opinion. I don't think there was any concern whatsoever other than just pure logistics. That's again, it's my opinion. I'm allowed to have opinions, folks. Now, part of me affording myself the luxury to have that opinion is that I'm not going to swallow the Bible whole. I won't even swallow the book of Job whole. I haven't even really been able to get past the first fucking chapter, as some folks have made note of, and then said, "Well, uh, why bother? Do you want to hear somebody talk about the book of Job who hasn't even bothered to read all of it?" It's like, yeah, I have, but yeah, it's been a while. But the point is, when it's pertaining or necessary, I will. If not, why would I? We're back to effectiveness. See, but see, this is a person who shows their hand, right? In the poker game, and I can't go too much far down there. I can see now that this is actually I'm beginning to improperly identify. So let's recenter ourselves. Get back to proper identification. Because what I am is not able to experience some of the states I was just about to experience. So yeah, here's your sign, Benton. Benton was starting to feel some type of way in his tissues there, but and I'll spare you the with all due deference and see, there's not gonna be a lot of, I'm not gonna speak as if I'm loving. Right. Here's the thing is, it's not for the being to speak as if they are a loving being. It's for the being, if in fact the being is able to consistent with its nature, if that's its nature is love and creation, it's for the being to bring that forth such that other folks, if they're paying attention, can tell. It's not for me to say, oh well, let me lovingly criticize this person, right? It's like, no, it's based on me. Can I criticize this person in this moment and still uh uh maintain what I need to maintain, right? And still be about my business, right? Not my so-called father's business, my business. So I will find. Let me see if I can find a way. But it's so the strategic part of my brain, which does react very strongly, and in fact, this is the idea of an enemy, and I don't consider this to be an enemy. What I mean is, like, from a Buddhist standpoint of, the idea of the enemy, or is like a Zen, this idea of the enemy is actually be grateful for the enemy because that's giving, me the opportunity to learn and grow and change. Well, yeah, that's true. Um, and whether or not that's the intended effect of the other in this case is not relevant. It's how it operates. It's all about me, right? And what am I able to do within myself, right? But not me, the persona, not me, the characteristics, not Benton shucking and jiving, hello, my baby, hello, my darling, hello, my ragtime gal, and to deliver some sort of praiseworthy performance, right? At times, in ways, I've delivered performances and was praised as a result. Who cares? It's dead, man. It's dead. Benton is dead, meaning the performance is dead. The thing that's performing is dead, right? That's all of this world, you know. At this point, I feel like if I could vibrate up out of here, I would probably just do so at this point. This idea of Christ ascending to heaven, you know. Believe you me, if I was able to do that in this moment, I almost halfway feel like I could. But if that was an option, I'm pretty sure that's the route old Benton would be taking. Just levitate my happy ass up out of here, right? Uh, and if I ever come back, it'll be because I jumped the heaven walls, man. I'm just saying that because I heard that in a song that I like. Chosen Few. Chosin. LA natives. Good stuff. If y'all ever want to check it out. There might be some of it on my community tab or my feed, my posts tab. That's hard for me to say. Posts. This is the thing about being Southern, man. There's certain words I can't even really just say properly. Posts. Posts. Ha! How silly. How silly. Well, at this point, I think we're chewing up, the royal we is chewing up a little too much of the remaining time. Although my understanding of StreamYards is as long as I leave myself for that last stream, as long as I leave myself, is it still the case if I have like 20 minutes left on my 20 hours, I can pretty much just that last stream can be, of the normal length, that they won't just cut you off? I think that's the case. So I guess I could keep, I've now threatened to end the stream, but now it's going to continue apparently. And yeah, I didn't finish. I did not finish my train of thought there. But so this notion of, in a context of a debate or a back and a forth, and I can tell what bothers me about that tactic of, how dare I reference a portion of the book of Job without then accepting that the rest of the chapters of the book have to be fully valid, and that now I'm going to engage in a back and forth, debate or discourse based on the entirety of the book of Job. Why? Like why? But for what purposes? See, but then I do get a benefit observing my internal space and how strongly and viscerally I react to somebody coming at me that way. It's because in my world, as a very, very competitive person, that is showing a lack of respect for one's opponent, right? Which should not bother me, but for some reason it does. And it's probably tied to my earliest competitive endeavors athletically, where I was treated disrespectfully, now that I think about it. Um, yeah, which was fine. I had no problem dealing with it. In fact, that's fuel for the flames, right? Fuel for the fire of, that's fuel to stoke the competitive fires, right? But there doesn't need, in this instance I'm speaking of, there's no need of a competition. And in fact, what I am doesn't create competition in the first place, right? What I am doesn't compete. What I am, there's nothing for it to compete with. It's the real thing. There is no competition. But again, not Benton the human, not Benton the characteristics, not Benton the backstory, not Benton sacrificed to Moloch and done wrong, arguably done wrong by a realm of death and destruction and depravity and a world of lies. That's the plight of another content creator in the space. Although I'm not even in the space anymore, as far as I can tell. But if anybody's familiar with this Jack Talcott character, I rarely go to. I've been to his channel very few times, but I've certainly listened to him speak quite a lot on other channels. And it seems to me what I've just described is, to my observation, seems to be the basis on which Jack is operating, but he's unable, he seemingly lacks the ability to ever come to these conclusions himself. And I don't believe it to be possible for any outside force to penetrate his internal space. So without him figuring it the fuck out for himself, it's not going to happen, which I actually respect that he can't be moved. he's operating based on he's seemingly operating based on what he knows to be true, and you can't. It, there doesn't seem to be any force that can change it, that can sway him from his path. Now, I feel like I've just made that I can describe in various ways how this is nothing good, right? Nothing that I would, nothing that what I am would resonate with, whatever resonate with. I can't see any value in that, but um, yeah, I respect it on some level. But I seem to have described the part of his plight is, will he ever be able to tell the difference between, if he is the same as what I am, part of that indivisible force, such that even saying a part of it is to speak incorrectly, but not within the context of delusion. Within the context of delusion, it's not to speak incorrectly, you know. And then it's interesting also to watch the interplay of the folks who like to go to his channel and engage with him as if there were any possibility of him. Now, there is a possibility of him growing and changing and transcending those limitations. I recognize very quickly, within within 1.5 times of hearing him talk, I realized that his psychology was so similar to my father's psychology that I said, "Oh, you cannot penetrate his internal space with those notions. It's not possible." But and that to me is the fascination. People are fascinated, not all of them, but many people are fascinated with this person whose motto is live without fear, right? But doing it in a way which, by practicing in the realm as Jack Talcott and performing as the epitome of delusion, meaning, you know, almost to self aggrandize oneself to the nth degree by almost attempting to compete with a delusory realm at the level of, asserting oneself delusively, right? Um, and now, whether or not any of that is valid or invalid, see, that has nothing to do with me. That's all. That's all Mr. Talcott's blessing or curse, right? That's his. I'm talking about the people who continue to interface with him as if there's any possibility whatsoever of penetrating the thick outer shell of his energy sphere enough to make even 1/10 of 1% of a difference in whatever goes on inside of him. Now, but there is the possibility of certainly assisting him into accessing and acting upon negative states such as anger. That seems to be a thing. And I guess that'll do, right? And I won't even call it trolling, when folks are, seeking to elicit a response, even if they are well-meaning, even if they're attempting to elicit a series of responses from Mr. Talcott that would eventually represent or symbolize him, taking their advice or their nuggets of wisdom and eventually riding the ship of his life. What, within a realm of delusion? What is the good is that? What profit a man to gain everything, to gain the whole world, but to lose his soul, right? So unless he's what I am and he's aligned with that mind, body, and spirit within himself, where's the value? See, what are we even talking about? Thanks for watching. Bye.